Hey folks, my name is Dave. Welcome to the shop here at NTD Racing. This is Honcho, our 1978 Jeep J10 Desert Race Truck, and that over there is Lefty. That is our new budget trophy truck. And today, I'm going to show you everything that I'm going to do to go from concept to design, and then put this whole thing into Bentek software, and then we're going to cut all the tubes out and build a roll cage. It's going to take about 5 videos to get through this whole thing. We'll start with the cab. I'll do another video for the front end and a video for the back end. I'll show you how I get all of the numbers, and then also really cool, I'll show you how I cut those things. On Honcho, I did all of the cutting just with the Bentek software and 2 angle grinders, and we made this entire very complex chassis. And on Lefty, we're going to Bentek, and we're going to cut all the tubes out there, and you're going to get to see what they're all about and their shop. It is going to be really cool. So as opposed to me telling you all about the Bentek software and why I think it is always better than any of the tube notchers out there just to have the software and a couple angle grinders, let me start showing you right now. Let's go ahead and get to this build. Okay, as we get started on the main cab of this roll cage, where's my start point? So all the dimensions, at least that I'm going to be working with, are going to start at the front of the car, and they're going to work their way towards the back. And so it's really just a matter of locating the tire where I want it, where I think it looks good. Now realize as this tire goes through its travel, it's not going to go straight up and down. It's got, I think it's called a tack angle. It's going to go backwards at about 6 degrees up into the wheel well. So I got to give it some space. And as it travels, it'll travel about 3 inches aft up into the wheel well, and it'll travel forward. So I got to make sure that as the tire turns, it has some room in there. So that's where I've located the tire, and it just so happens to fall on this crack. Let's talk about some of the tools that I'll be using while I'm going to get all the dimensions, because I think one of the big things that people have issues with is how do I make pick points, and what do I use to do those kinds of things to make a roll cage. And here's what I use. So first thing I used was I want to give myself a reference line. I'm going to try to make this whole thing into a grid, an X, Y, and Z axis. So what I have here is on the floor is I have a line drawn all the way down to the very end. It is parallel with the car. That's my Y axis. And then from there, I use a square and then a piece of straight aluminum, angle aluminum there. And I can pull dimensions from there 90 degrees off of that line and then find a good distance, and that's going to give me my X, and then I get my Y. Z just by using a ruler going straight up to whatever the point is. A couple other things that I'm going to use is how do I find exactly where the points are that are in space that'll make up the the A pillars and the B pillars. Well, I just use an old plumb bob. This happens to be my grandpa's plumb bob. I don't know, that thing's like 100 years old. I'm like, that is pretty cool. And then also I'm using a paper towel tube. And the reason I use these is because their diameter is 1.6 inches. And so what that allows me to do is I measure from the outside because I'm trying to find where the center point of a 2-inch tube is going to go. So if I measure from the outside of this, then that is half of my 2-inch tube plus 0.6 inches, or about a half of an inch, which gives me some slop. So that allows me to be just give a little bit of room between where the tube is going to go and the fiberglass is going to go, and that's the slop I want. And then from there, I just put some magnets on there, and this way, as you can kind of see over here on the side of the truck, what I'm doing is the magnets are on the other side. They're holding the tubes on this side, and then now I can move them around, and you can see as I kind of slide and move those tubes around, the magnets just kind of follow on the other side, and then I can move them around and figure out exactly where I want the tubes to land on the inside. And the last part I do is I mark right on the floor with a Sharpie pen. I've got an epoxy floor. It's all beaten up, but it's pretty good. And you can see I've already been doing this a little bit. I've been kind of putting some marks onto the floor. And to get these off, I just use some acetone and it cleans it right off. But I use a permanent so that it doesn't come off if I'm just kind of cleaning the floor with water or something like that and soap. So it does stay on there pretty good. This time I'm going to go ahead around with a red pen because this is the second time I'm doing the measurements, and I want to make sure I can distinguish from when I did it the first time to the second time to kind of see if my measurements were the same, or sometimes I will intentionally move my pick points around as I'm getting better at making the roll cage every time I do this. And so I just want to make sure I don't pick the wrong point that I'm going to mark onto the floor. Let's go ahead, get up underneath the car and see how we use all these things. And let's start pulling some pick points off, and you can kind of see, my thought process on how I'm setting up and using all of the pick points. Before we hop onto the car and start getting pick points, let me show you some of the other dimensions that I found were critical to get, and that is off of the engine. So what I've done again is I made a y-axis, and I am going to take points off of there on the y-axis and also in the x. And so I started with just the very front face of the engine, and that is where the ruler is. And so here's some things that I need to look at as I'm kind of come down here is, again, I am building a truck on a budget. I don't think it's worse, but I'm just not buying stuff I don't think I need to buy. So I need to come all the way back, and you can kind of see here where the oil pan drops down. So this is where the front of the engine cradle is going to start, and it's going to go through right there. As I continue back, I want to know where the back of the oil pan is going to be, because I'm running a tube through there such that I can comply with all the score rules as far as chassis design. There has to be a tube that goes all the way through. As I continue back looking at the transmission now and how the transmission is going to clear, again, I'm going to have that tube right underneath the transmission. And so one of the things that we didn't do on Honcho, which I want to make sure that we're doing on Lefty, is I didn't give myself the ability to pull the transmission out without taking out the engine. And that becomes a huge factor, because the transmissions come in and out a lot more, I think, than the engines do. And you don't want to undo all the plumbing that goes to an engine every single time. So I need to be able to drop the engine out the bottom. So that being said, with that tube being back about 2 inches into the transmission, that means when I take the transmission out, it's got to go backwards 2 inches before it drops out. So I need to figure out where does the back of the transmission land, and especially that yoke right there, or the slip yoke, which I might be changing that later on, but for right now, that's what we got to work with. Obviously the slip yoke will come out and the transmission can drop back a little bit. It can obviously tilt, but once you start tilting the transmission too much, you put fluid all over the place. So if you can make it to where they come out straight up and down, that makes it a little bit easier. So that being said, I need just to figure out and make sure that as the transmission comes back, it can go down and then clear the rear member that I'm going to make back over there. But now that I have all these dimensions, this is where it's going to start, because realize that the engine is kind of one of the main drivers for where everything else goes. It's like you got the front of the vehicle with a front shock mounts in the front, and then it's going to go engine, transmission, rear of your roll cage, the cab part, trailing arms to the rear axle, and all those kinds of things. So you need to locate your engine and find out exactly where that's going to go, and then kind of all the other dimensions will work themselves out after that. All right, all that stuff being said, let's find our starting point for this whole build. Here's the face of the engine right here at the 0 point. You can kind of see where the face of the furthest point forward on the engine is right there. And I come back 17 inches over here on the floor, and now you can kind of see this is where, if you can kind of see underneath here, that is where the front of the oil pan is. This is as far back as my 4-inch by 4-inch cradle can go. So halfway up for where I'm going to put all those digits into Bentek is right at the 15-inch point. Now, at the front of the engine over here, the spacing that I need off of the parts that are going to make up my front, the whole structure that's going to kind of come up and make my steering box area, and also where the shocks are going to mount, that needs to be about 3 more inches out in front there. So I'm going to add 3 more inches onto that. So now I know the 0 point for my build, because I'm using the center of this member here of the cradle, is going to be 18 inches back, 3 plus 15, 18 inches back from where that front wheel goes. And now I can start from there with some good points. Back over here underneath the vehicle on the y-axis, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start where I have my front tire. That's exactly where the center is going to be. I'm going to come back to 18 inches and I'm going to mark. And this is going to be my 0 point for the whole build. All of the Y stuff is going to be measured off of that point. And that'll make it easy, because then when I make my pick point for this part over here, which is going to be the lower part of the rocker, I guess if you call it that, I can just go right off of there. I don't have to do any funky math. It comes right off of 0. If it's 18 inches back, then boom, there's my number right there. Let's go ahead and start pulling some pick points off of the roll cage. All right, so this first point that I'm going to find here is just the front of the cage. And I'm kind of using this line from the body that comes down. I'm going to use that as the forward part of whatever the roll cage is going to go. And it should, you know, I'm just looking for a place I think will clear the tire and all that kind of stuff and stay inside the cage to make it look good. I'm using this tube, and I don't need to use two tubes. I'm just going to kind of eyeball line this thing up. And I basically want that tube to be sitting just inside of the fiberglass when I make this thing. Now I drop my plumb bob down. I'll try to move my hands so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Is I'm going to drop this plumb bob down, and I'm going to wait till it just touches the ground at the exact spot that I want it. Get it to stop swinging, and once it's right in the spot and it's not swinging anymore, I'm just going to go ahead and lay it down, and it won't move. Then I'm going to come back with my pen now, and I'm going to mark that point off with an X right at the tip of the plumb bob. And now what I can do is I can go from my 0 point back to here and get my Y dimensions, and then I can measure. I could measure from over here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the same spot on the other side of the truck, and then I'm going to measure the distance between the two, divide those by 2 to get my x-axis. And I'll show you that here in a second. Let's talk a little bit about how to get, what I think is one of the more difficult parts, and that is this whole A-pillar here. So first off, what I want to do is, you know, I think about 2 things. Is how is it going to fit with this whole fiberglass body, and then how am I going to manufacture it later on when I'm ready to get this thing together. So I got these tubes laid up here, and you saw I had those magnets on there, so I can kind of move them around a little bit to get them exactly where I want. So this first tube, what I want it to do is I want that tube to lay right up underneath this sill. And just because, you know, this is where as you get in and out of the truck, you're going to put a lot of weight on here. And so I actually want this thing to be resting on that 2-inch tube so that it takes the weight of your body and doesn't just destroy this part of the fiberglass. So that is basically a hard dimension there. And then I want that tube to come straight all the way out. Now, as far as the A pillar goes, it's going to start back over here at the top of the B pillar. It's going to run down the window, make one bend, and then I can do one of 2 things. Is I could make a second bend and come straight down here, you know, or I can keep it going straight. And I would rather keep it going straight just because I don't want to make more bends. But I'm going to have those 2 tubes meet here, and then I'm going to have another tube kind of go all the way down to the rocker is how I'm going to do that, and try to minimize the, you know, trying to land perfectly, you know, a cope right here to a bend to another bend straight down there to the rocker. That ends up being difficult to hit those perfectly, and I find that if I just separate those into separate tubes and do some gusset work, I can kind of hit those a little bit more accurately. So what we'll do is we'll figure out how I want this tube right here to travel up the A pillar and then meet up there, and then we'll take the junction off that, we'll drop a line back down there to the floor and mark it on the ground to start again getting the where is this thing in space in X, Y, and Z axes there. So let's go ahead and get those points. All right, so now that I have these 2 tubes in there, basically where I want them to go, what I'm going to do now is just take where these 2 center lines would meet on this tube out here, and I'm going to go ahead and drop that line all the way down to the floor again and get it to rest on the floor. And once it does, I'm going to go ahead and lay it over, lay the plumb bob over, go down here and mark it on the floor. All right, so I got the tube set up for the top here of the A pillar, and this will be the one bend that goes on this tube. And some of the things I'm thinking about as I make this is I really kind of want to give this tube right here across the top the best opportunity to be level with the tube that goes across the arm of the, or whatever you want to call it, underneath the windowsill. And the reason being is I know that there are window nuts that are 24 inches long by 24 inches wide, and so I'm trying to keep this to be a square box as best I can. So I'm going to shoot for this tube to come all the way across and just be parallel with this tube so I can use cheap window nets, because this is a budget race truck. I don't want to spend $400 on window nets. So anyway, I'm going to find that point over here again where these 2 meet as best I can. I'm going to drop the plumb bob onto the ground, see where that thing lands, lay it over, and then go down there and mark that point with my red pen. Okay, one more thing to talk about, and this was a question I had when I was using the Bentek software, is how do the bends work? And so what you do is, this is why I'm kind of using these tubes, is I want to find where does the center line of these tubes meet. It's, it's right about here is where the center line of these tubes meet. And this is the point, your pick point, that you need to put into Bentek. You need to find where this is in space, in the X, Y, and Z axis. And then you put that point in there, and when you go into Bentek and you say start here, go to here, one bend for this tube, and then go over to this pick point. So pick point 1, 2, and 3 with one bend in it. It's going to go ahead in there and it's going to radius that. So it's actually going to come down here, and so the actual tube won't really go through this point. It's actually going to bend. It's going to be just the bottom of that point. It's going to continue up over here. But that's how you find the pick points that you can put into the software. Okay, now that I have all of my markings on the floor that I'm going to take measurements from, now I can go ahead and put that into something that I will be able to read later and put into the computer. Now, it is worth learning kind of the language that you're going to use when you put this stuff into the computer. As opposed to like X, Y, and Z, they talk about floor, ceiling, front, back, and left and right. So when I transcribe my measurements, I put them into my notes in the same way. Let me show you how I do that. So first I start with, I'm at my 0, and I need to go back, and the first point I'm going to start with is the rocker down there, the very front end of where the A-pillar is going to meet the rocker panel. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my straight edge thing here, and I'm going to put it right up against that point. I'm going to make sure that it is riding along this line so I'm consistent with how I'm taking my measurements. And I'm going to go ahead and measure this right here, and I come up with 14 3/4. So now I know I'm going to go to my notes. I'm going to write down 14 3/4 on my notes. It's going to be 14 3/4 back from that reference point that I had made. Second is I need to know how far in does it go. Well, actually what I would need to know, since my reference point is the center where the engine's going to be, how far do I have to go left for this thing? And I could measure from this line, but what I really need to know is from the center line. So what I did is I measured from point to point all the way across, and I got 74 inches. If this will focus on there, 74 inches divided by 2, that's 37 inches. So my left value is 37 inches. And then my vertical value, well, the body of the truck is going to be 20 inches off the ground at ride height. And here's just a crazy picture. This might make a little sense. The body kind of comes down and it makes this little lip right here under the rocker, and you can kind of see that lip right here is what we're talking about. The way that I want the tube to sit is I want that to sit just slightly underneath it. I want the tube to be right underneath the rocker by about, so the center line would be an inch below. But my reference is the center of this 4x4 square tubing that makes up that engine cradle. So the center of that is 2 inches from the top, and I want the top of this tube to be lined up with the top of a 4x4 such that it makes a floor, basically the floor where I'm going to put my feet in the truck. So this 2-inch line comes over. So basically the center line of the round tube has to go up 1 inch. So when I put that into the program, I'm going to say go to the ceiling 1 inch. So I'm going to go back 14 3/4. I'm going to go left 37 inches, and I'm going to go towards the ceiling or up 1 inch. And that gives me my first point. And that makes it really easy, I think, to make a pick point once you see what the pick points look like. And I'll show you those here in a second. Now, how do I make the second point? Well, what I don't do, and this is something I do just to make it easy on myself, is I'm going to go in now and I'm going to say, where is the second point in relation to the first point? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start measuring that. And now the reference point for my next pick point will be this first pick point. So let's go ahead and get the measurements for that. All right, so I'm going to use 2 squares to get the next dimensions off of here. And you see right here, this is where the rocker is. And then when I drop the plumb bob for the, where I call it the armrest, the part where it goes underneath the windowsill and it connects with the A-pillar, is right here. And so when I put this into Bentek software, now I'm going 2 3/4 inches forward. Now I realize that it falls in between, But if I was to err anyway, I'd want that junction to be just slightly far forward, so I'll just round up to 2 3/4. So I say, okay, the next pick point I put in there, referencing this point, will be 2 3/4 inches forward. And then going from the rocker out, so going to the right, it should be right 1 towards the center of the vehicle. And then as far as the dimensions vertically, I just measured, straight up from that point to the next one. Obviously you got to make sure you pay attention to center line to center line. And for me, it happens to be 30 3/4 inches. And then now I'll use this point now, will become my 0 point. And as I go to the next point, and I just start building it, using, now this will be my reference pick point, and I'll use that reference pick point to build the next pick point. So and that's how I do that. And we'll do that all the way across for the A pillar. We'll come back down for the B pillar, and then we'll do the rest of the truck. Let's go ahead and get those dimensions, and then I'll show you how we put them into the Bentek software, and you can see how easy it is now using this stuff, to kind of keep you from getting too confused, to build your own roll cage in Bentek. All right, let's go ahead and see if we can't work through this in one take. And I say one take. I've been actually practicing this quite a bit. This is the original Honcho roll cage. And if I go over to main, you can kind of see what that looks. And that's what Honcho look like. And I'm taking some of the elements of this design that I really liked, and I'm changing some other ones. You can kind of see I was actually going through it here and tinkering with some of the stuff. You kind of see how the roll cage was kind of a set of afterthoughts around in here, and I was trying to clean it up on the other side of the roll cage, taking out some of the elements. Really with Lefty is trying to make it stronger with fewer pieces is kind of my goal. And let me see if I can pull up one of these ones that I've been practicing on. This is kind of where we're working towards. This isn't a complete product here, but this is kind of what we're working at today. So with that, let's go ahead and start with a new assembly, and we'll start over fresh. Now I realize that there are some of the templates on here for making the B pillar hoop and all that kind of stuff, and I have kind of steered away from using that. I just kind of like to now use just some pick points. And you saw me take the pick points off of Lefty's body, and then now what I've done is I've gone through and I've kind of planned out and mapped how I'm going to put all that stuff into the Bentek software, because you gotta have a plan, otherwise you kind of fish around and you're doing. So I try to do all the math before I put it on there, and there's just a little bit of dimensioning and those kinds of things, getting some basic stuff, so you have a plan for what you're gonna do. So with that, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start right at the center, and I'm calling the 0 point for this whole roll cage. This center here is going to be the front of what I call that engine cradle. So we'll start with that, and we'll start doing pick points. So we go to pick points, and I'm going to select this as the reference, and the first one is going to be right 11 inches. And I'm going to apply that, and then I'm going to say, when I just click on left, it just assumes that what I want to do is I want to make a mirror image of it, and it just puts 11 in the other side. And that's one of the nice things about Bentek. Now, realize that if you hit the enter key, you've done nothing. So you literally have to click on apply to get those 2 pick points on there, and there they are. I'm going to add in another set of pick points here, and let me see if I do math in public here. 26, 13, 13.5. So I'm going to say, let's say this one now. I'm going to say 13.5, and I'll show you why I'm doing this here in a second. Apply, and then right apply. And so what I'm going to do is, and I'll show you in a second, I'm going to put the other set of pick points. I'm going to complete kind of the cradle here. So I'm going to clear all the values on this, and I'm going to make another pick point. I'm going to pick this point right here. I'm going to go back 46 inches, apply. I'm going to grab this one over here and then apply. And it's going to do the same thing. It's going to go 46 inches for that one, 46 inches for that one. And then since they'll keep the values in there until you say clear the values. And then from there, let me show you what this engine cradle is going to look like. Now, here's another part that you got to kind of set up with Bentek. Is you got to tell it what your material is that you're using, and there's tutorials how to do that, and that's not what this one's about today. This is me just showing you how I make a roll cage, but this stuff is pretty easy to figure out. So I like to use this 4x4. I think it's like the strongest stuff on earth. Probably the strongest substance on earth is a 4x4 120 wall. I don't know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a straight piece out of that, and I'm going to go from the outsides here over here. And this tells me the rotation is laying flat on the ground, so I don't want any rotation of this thing. It really only asks you that when you have a part that is not round. There you go. I'm going to go from there to there and there to there. I'm just kind of clicking the points I want it to go between. You're like, well, why did you go from here to here for this one, but you only went from these inner ones from that one? I'll show you why here. If I click on main, it's going to show you what the image looks like. And here is why when I weld this thing together, I find that what I'm going to do is when I make this point right here, I find that when I weld that, it's not going to cut these parts over here. It's going to cut that off. But that weld is a lot easier for me personally than welding to the very end of this part. So I just want it sticking out a little bit so I got a flat surface to weld to. And I find that's easier. So as I'm going through this in general, I'm trying to figure out, okay, how am I actually going to manufacture this? What am I going to do to weld this thing? So I will put those features in there to make it a little bit easier on myself. All right, from there, we're going to make a couple more pick points. So I'm going to go back over to pick points. And I had 46 in here. I still want to go 46, but this time I want to go back from the center. Why do I want to go back from the center? I'm putting a random pick point out there. You might be asking why. And that's because just, as I planned out how I was going to put this thing together, I dimensioned my next tube from the center point. And now here it brings in another, I'm going to clear all the values. Now I'm going to make the back tube. This is basically going to be the tube that goes all the way across the back and ends up making the back of my roll cage, and then ties in the engine cradle. I'm going with round tube for this one, so I'm going to change this to 2-inch DOM, and I'm going to go from this pick point. This whole part, I got to go to my notes here, is going to be 37 inches left, and then I'm going to apply that. Disregard. I'm going to hit Control-Z to get rid of that. It is going to be 37 inches left, but remember that the pick points will pick the center of the tube that you're using. Another thing you got to think about is that the center of the 4x4 is 2 inches up, 2 inches in, and the center of the 2-inch tube is 1 inch in. So I've actually got to go towards the ceiling 1 inch, and I'll say 1 right there, and I'm actually going to make, you know what? I don't want it to cut the top of that tube, so I'm going to say 0.875. That'll give me 1.25 at the top, which is a 1/8 of an inch, which is the thickness basically of the steel at the top, and it'll give me kind of a lap to weld onto there. It's a long story. It'll make more sense when I kind of do it back over here, but I'm only going to go up just slightly there, and you'll kind of see as I make this and apply that. Oh, I got to select reference point. How about that reference point? Now apply. And then I'm going to go right. It's going to keep that ceiling in there, so it's going to go the same up. It's going to go right now on the other side, 37 inches. And then now when I go in here and I say, okay, I'm going to put this tube in between those two, and then you'll see why I did that 0.875. As I go in here and look at it, now as I scroll in here, you can kind of see now this piece of metal lays on top of that tube there. And that, again, is how I want to manufacture that. And then the bottom here, I will probably, what I'll do is I'll probably cut these back so it kind of gives a ramp coming off. I'll plate in a piece of steel there to kind of reach up and grab that tube right there. So that is how I'll manufacture that. And we'll see if before we go to Bentek, if we can do that, because I'd rather have their dragon cut that piece out, which I think would be pretty trick. All right, so now I got that piece. And then, all right, let's start building from here. We'll start building the A-pillar hoop. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go back to pick points. And this is where having the pick points all planned out definitely makes life just a little bit easier. I'm going to clear all the values here. I'm going to go from this point, and I'm going to go towards the ceiling. Again, that 0.875 inches. I'm going to go left 37 inches, the same as the back one, because I'm going to make this a little bit easy on me. I'm going to square it off and make that whole thing a square. It just kind of makes the dimensions just a little bit easier. And then I'm going to go towards the back or towards the rear of the aircraft. Sorry, I'm a pilot. Sometimes I say aircraft. I'm going to go towards the back at 13.75 inches. And that is where that tube is going to basically land in relation to the cradle there. And I'm going to apply that one. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do the exact same thing on the other side. So I'm going to say write all those same dimensions and apply. Cool. Now I got that point right there. Now I'm going to start continuing this A pillar in the vertical. And what I said is I'm going to zero out all of the dimensions. And here is where I kind of like I said, it makes sense to me to kind of work off of a point I already had. I don't always have to come back to this point. So now I'm going to select this one as my reference. And for this one, I'm going to go towards the ceiling at 30 3/4 of an inch. I'm going to move, it's only going to go right a little bit. It goes in 1 inch. And then it's going to actually move forward. So I'm going to go front 1.75 inches. I'm going to apply that. Now I want the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to go ahead and now select this one. The only difference is now I move this right one to a left one. Again, those dimensions will stay in there. I'm going to hit apply. Now I got that second point on the A pillar. And then I'm going to go all the way up to the very top of the A pillar there. Again, I'm going to zero all the values out. I'm going to select this point now. And this new one is going to be towards the ceiling 21.5 inches. I'm going to go to the right 9 inches. And then I'm going towards the back of the car 19.75. I'm going to apply that. And this is where you can kind of get lost sometimes. This thing, I'm going to do the same thing over here, change that right to a left and apply that. Now I got all those parts, all those things in there. And it kind of, you can kind of get lost in here. So this is where, again, I think having a little bit of a plan will help out your life while you're doing this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the back, on this B pillar. So I've got this point right here already established. So I've built the rest of the B pillar on this point. So I'm going to go back to this. There's two points I'm going to reference off of this point right here. And the first one's going to be basically the one that extends off of what I call this armrest pillar here on our piece. I don't know. And it's going to go from this point, and we're going to go back. We're going to go 25.75 inches. And then we're going to go to the right 0.625. Aim small, miss small. All right, and then we're going to go towards the ceiling at 30.75. There we go. I'm going to apply that. Now don't get lost here in all these little dots. Now I'm going to go ahead and select this one. I'm going to do the same one. I just got to go left as opposed to right. Apply. And then now I'm going to go up into the top of the B pillar hoop. I'm going to select this point. I'm going to go straight up, so the back value is going to be 0. I'm going to go to the right at 7.125. And then I'm going to go towards the ceiling at 25.25. I'm going to apply that till those numbers are right. Again, here are crazy dots. You gotta, let me see, ceiling right, make the right a left, and then apply. All right, there we go. That looks awesome. There's one more point I'm going to put in here, and that comes off of these points right here. I'm going to clear out all the values. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to go back. Let me see, what did I say I was going to do? 12, let me see, I'm going to go back 13.75. And this is actually, I pulled this dimension right off of Honcho. I really was happy with the dimensions of our rear suspension setup. So I'm going to go with the same setup for Lefty as far as our our setup goes, because then I actually have parts already, the CAD already ready to go for my mounts or our rear suspension. I'm going to use the same thing because if it ain't broke, I don't know how I'd make it better, so I'm not going to try to make it better. I'm going to go off that one, and then that one. I'm going to do the same thing. Apply. Boom. All right. Here we go. Let's go ahead and connect some dots. Let's start over here with our B pillar hoop, and that's these 4 dots right here. And I might mess it up. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to go 2-inch DOM, and I'm going to make a bend. Please, okay, select the die. So here's another thing that you need to do when you in Bentek, and you need to spend a couple dollars to do this. You have to take a piece of metal and run their calibration wizard. And when you do that, all your bends are going to land exactly. But until you do that, they're not going to work quite right. So I've calibrated my 2-inch tube die. I'm going to select that one. I'm going to make a bend. And I'm just gonna make 2 bends, and I've reduced my B pillar hoop as much as I can to just making 2 bends. I've made 4 bends in the past, and I've landed it within about 1/16 of an inch, but it took me like 3 tries to get there. So the easier I can make this on myself, that I will, and it ends up making a lot of the fabrication just a little bit easier also. And I don't feel like I give up much in strength when I put this thing together. So I'm gonna say okay. And then I'm going to go from this point to this point, that point to that point. And I'm going to call it point 1. I say, okay, that sounds cool. And this kind of goes back to, remember when I was talking about setting up your pick points and your bends. And you see how that bend, this line, if it continued going straight, it would go right through that line. And this line, if it continued going straight, it would go right through that point right there. But the bend goes to the inside there. And that kind of illustrates, why you do that. Now, why did I pick this pillar first? And I'll show you that here right now why I did that as I make the A pillars in the design is because, all right, I'm going to do a bend again. This one's going to have 1 bend in it, okay. And I think I got the right ones. I'm going to click this point, that point. And here is why I make like the 1 bend first, is because I zoom in here. This thing, if I snap to here, I'm not actually landing that tube on my B pillar. And then if I kind of come in here, you got to pay attention to where it grabs and snaps onto. I like it to snap right to the middle of the bend, unless there's some reason, I would kind of prefer it to snap down over here because it'll help me clear my suspension later on. But in general, I think for strength, and especially since we're dealing with, the B pillar, which is basically protecting the occupants here, I want to land it in the middle of that bend and kind of support that node as best I can. So all my points are going to go to that node, especially there over the heads of the drivers. So there is that point, and again illustrating there's my pick point, and the bend doesn't actually even touch it. There we go. So I'll do that one, and then we're going to do one more bend here. I'm going to go okay. I'm going to go boom, boom, and it should be blue, and that's going to be the center one. Okay. Cool, so there is that. And then now we kind of just start connecting some dots here to make this look cool. I'm going to go straight pieces, 2-inch 2M. I'm going to go there. And then from there to there. Oh, out there to there. There to there. There to there. You'll find that sometimes you'll click on something and all of a sudden your tube will be like this crazy tube in space or whatever. How did that end up happening? So there. All right. And then I'm going to put in these parts right here, which will close that part of the tube. And then, yeah, there'll be some of these in here. There's going to be a ton of tubes on this thing. So it's going to be a maze of tubes. I'm just kind of connecting all the dots of all the stuff I put in there. And there will be another tube that goes across here, but it'll actually be 3 tubes because one tube will hit my 4x4, and then the next one will drop just slightly so that it clears my my oil pan in the truck. So just so you get an idea, here's what we look like right now as far as the roll cage goes. I'm going to go in here and put this tube in. I think that the color coordination is it goes purple, blue, purple, and blue would be the center line of that bend there, and that's what I'll stick with for those. So cool. So this is a huge opening right here. And if you look back at Honcho, we actually just left it like that. And then I started looking at, where do I get all my ideas? I look at all the cool dudes out there who got their really awesome race trucks, and I copy them. And I changed designs to kind of fit what we have. Obviously, we got the engine cradle because I'm too cheap to buy a nice racing oil pan or dry sump or anything like that. And so we do that to kind of accommodate our big transmission and our engine that we're using there. Let me see. I work on a budget. That's what we do. I'm going to go ahead and now what I want to do is something a little bit different than just pick points. Is I want to put a pick point on a line. How do you do that? So you go over here and you select lines, and then you select your reference, and then I want that line right there. Now I've calculated that I want this thing to be about 19 inches from here. And you're like, well, oops, on the wrong side. You go over here and you say swap ends. You could also say split it in half and I'll put it in the center. But I said swap ends, and I'm going to apply that, and then I'm going to say reference this one, swap ends again, and apply that. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a straight line again from there down to there, and then from there down to there. And now this is where the roll cage is in accordance with kind of like the score rules. It's going to complete itself. And you can kind of, if you're familiar with score, they have like a basic, all the regulating agencies have basic roll cage design stuff that you have to do. But if you can kind of show that you go over, then your design can look slightly different than what theirs looks like. But it sure better be structurally as good or better than what they show you as far as the minimums go for the design. And in general, I find that they're like, they take a look and they go, yep, that's pretty good. When in doubt, make a triangle is what I find. So with that, let's go ahead and make some more triangles. And so what I will do is, you kind of got all these nodes just kind of floating out there in space. And like I said, make a triangle. I'm going to go from here to here, and I'm going to basically grab all these, and then now you can kind of see everything is a triangle, no parallelograms except for this one up here. This one is a parallelogram, but you got to be able to get in and out of the car. But these are all triangles, and that will make the structure very rigid. And so you can kind of take a look at how that's going to look once it's all together there. I'll do the same thing on this side. Do some straight tubes there. Cool. There. Now you can kind of see how long it's going to take me to weld this thing together and cut all these tubes. You haven't seen anything yet. We're just doing the cab today. So there's that. Now the other part of this is that we got to figure out how does this engine pass through here. And what I did is, and I'm talking engine really in the next video, but I did all the measurements, and something I haven't done before is I'm running coolant and also exhaust, everything down the center this time, as opposed to going right to the outside. I think it's going to be pretty tricky. The exhaust is going to lay right up on top of these, and I think we'll be able to protect the occupants from the heat of the exhaust for the most part. Anyway, so, but how am I going to do this tunnel, and what's it going to look like inside the cab? All right, well, let's do this. I'm going to go back to pick points, and I'm going to start making some pick points just to make the pass through here. Let me see. I got my notes. What's that going to look like? All right. I'm going to pick single points. I'm going to use the center point, and usually it'll snap to the center point as a reference there. And I'm going to go clear all the values. I'm going to go 14 right, apply, 14 left, and apply. And then on this back tube back over here, I'm going to go, that one's going to be 10 right, apply, or left and right. And put in this tube right here just so I have a reference for making all the next points. So what I will do is I'm going to go from the center point again. I'm going to do a pick point, and how far do I want these apart? 13. So I'm going to go main, pick points, single, center, clear all values, right 13, apply, left 13, and apply. All right, so these tubes that I'm putting in right now do not have to be inside, just for score. This truck will be over 4,000 pounds. The minimum tube size has to be 2-inch DOM or chromoly, 120 wall. And I picked DOM just because it's less expensive and there's no heat treating, and I find it, I'm just not going to get a huge advantage personally from using chromoly. Now I realize that they can go in there and optimize if you are one of those teams that's super smart on that kind of stuff. And you can say, look, we've optimized it, and here's our engineering drawings that show you that we're just as strong as a DOM tube, and they do that. I just don't have that technology today. I'm going straight tubes, and I'm going to go from here to here, here to there. I'm going to come straight down to here, and that will basically be my tunnel for this thing. And besides that, the rest of the stuff I'm going to be, let me see, I'll put one more here. I'm going to go from here to the center and then back down. That'll basically hold up that tube that goes across. I don't know what they call that. There's some smart name for that. I can't remember what it is. Besides that, any of the other tubes that kind of do make up the rear of the roll cage do have to be in 2-inch DOM, because this would normally be like a diagonal. But what I will be doing is, something that looks more like this, is I kind of do all the bracing inside here for going through the tunnel and making all these things as best I can at 90 or triangles back here, such as if we did roll a truck, it wouldn't collapse on the occupants. And so I did a whole bunch of stuff there, and it'll kind of make more sense when I do this. And now you can kind of see what the truck is going to look like. This is how the roll cage will look for the most part. And I may change up some of this stuff back here, trying to, again, make it as strong as I can, but we're not putting in more tubes than I necessarily have to. But this kind of does look reasonable. Realize I think that this tube I put in right here probably not going to be there, just because I've got to put in those mounts, and they're going to go right about here for the trailing arms. All right, from here, you might be saying to yourself, wow, these pieces right here sure seem to be sticking out in space. And so our plan for that will be something I haven't done in the past, is we're going to brace those out there like this. And then the next step from here, and in the next video, I'm going to come straight out and I'm going to show you how we're going to make the roll cage around the engine and also the front suspension. And we'll be working with the geometry calculator to get the front suspension geometry just right. And I'll show you exactly how we do that and how we're going to basically set up an area where I can put in the whole steering system, which I'm using the same but slightly modified to make it a little bit better and easier to work on for the steering system. That's going to be really cool. And then the last video in this series, before we go to Bentek and actually use the Dragon machine, is I'm going to show you how we do the back of the roll cage, how we set it up to have bump stops, how we clear the fuel tank in the rear, and also set up and clearance everything for tires and all that kind of stuff in the back. And we'll show you that. And then I'm going to take all these pieces on that video, and I'm going to show you how I take them into individual pieces, how I plan out my cuts, so I can send those off to, we can take those to Bentek, and then we're going to use the Dragon machine at Bentek, recording it, probably like 2 videos there. It's going to be really cool. Can't wait for that. Anyway, with that, this is what this thing is starting to look like, and you can kind of see that, inside here, I love using this really wide body because there's so much room in there. We're going to be using some Mastercraft seats in here. They're 22 inches wide, and the width inside here is about 27, so there's going to be plenty of room to get seat belts and all that kind of stuff in there, which was really tough in Honcho, but this is going to be super cool. And then a lot of room in there to get all the stuff for like steering wheels and brake systems. I kind of got a plan for how I'm going to do the brakes this time. I think it's going to be pretty cool. Anyway, there you go. That's what it looks like right now. More to come on the next video. Tune in. Oh man, so much to do. There are so many tubes, and I will tell you what, when we were making Honcho, we were cutting out, I think on the order of we started with 2 tubes a day. We got up to a point where we were making 10 to 13 tubes per day for Honcho, and it had about almost 100 individual tubes in this build. This one I'm shooting for fewer, and what's going to be awesome is when we go to Bentek and they go hit play and just start shooting tubes out. And I think that in about a couple hours we will do. It took me months to do on this thing. I really can't wait to do that. Let's go ahead and wrap this video up. I'm already working on the next one. Let's go ahead and get to that one. I will see you in a couple days. Take care of yourself.